In what began as a tranquil evening at Riverside Commons, a routine disturbance by intoxicated bikers escalated into one of the most remarkable displays of tactical prowess in recent memory. When the infamous Road Demons motorcycle gang thought they'd found another helpless target in this peaceful waterfront park, they never expected to encounter Major Victoria Ramirez, a decorated Marine Force Recon veteran who would teach them the difference between intimidation and true warfare. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The last rays of summer sun painted golden streaks across the calm waters of the riverside as Victoria Ramirez maintained her steady pace along the park's winding trail. 20 years of Marine Corps discipline showed in every measured step, her movements precise despite the punishing distance she'd already covered. The evening air carried the sweet scent of blooming jasmine, a stark contrast to the desert winds she'd grown accustomed to during her 4 tours in Iraq. Something shifted in the atmosphere, a subtle change that triggered the same instincts that had kept her alive in countless combat situations. Victoria slowed her pace, her trained senses cataloging the unusual silence that had descended over the normally bustling park. The Riverside Cafe, typically filled with evening patrons, stood eerily empty. The popular fishing dock, usually crowded with local anglers, was deserted. Even the teenage musicians who regularly practiced near the amphitheater were nowhere to be seen. David Chen, the elderly Tai Chi instructor who'd been teaching morning classes in the park for 3 decades, approached Victoria with unusual urgency. His normally peaceful demeanor was replaced with visible anxiety as he glanced over his shoulder. "Major Ramirez," he whispered, his voice carrying the weight of barely contained fear. "They're back, and this time," he trailed off, pulling up his sleeve to reveal ugly bruises mottling his arm. "They're demanding protection fees from everyone who uses the park for classes or business. When I refused..." He gestured to his injuries, his hands trembling slightly. Victoria had noticed the changes creeping into Riverside Commons over the past month. This park had always been the jewel of the community, a place where families gathered for weekend picnics, where local artists showcased their work, where children learned to fish from the patient regulars at the dock. But recently, fear had begun to cast long shadows over this sanctuary, emptying the playgrounds, silencing the street musicians, turning this vibrant community space into a no-man's land after sunset. The distant rumble of motorcycles shattered the uneasy quiet. Not the familiar sound of weekend riders enjoying the scenic riverside route, but something more menacing, more purposeful. 6 custom choppers roared into the main parking area, their engines deliberately thunderous, their riders wearing leather cuts emblazoned with a demon's head wreathed in flames. Victoria's combat-honed instincts kicked in automatically, assessing threats and cataloging details with practiced efficiency. The leader, a hulking figure they called Butcher, stumbled off his bike, sending empty whiskey bottles clattering across the pavement. His crew, Razor, Spike, Ghost, Tank, and Wire, spread out in a practiced formation that spoke of something more organized than simple gang violence. These weren't just drunk bikers looking for trouble. Their movements, despite their intoxication, showed signs of military background gone wrong. "Get inside the community center," Victoria told David quietly, her voice carrying the same calm authority that had guided Marine reconnaissance teams through the most treacherous operations. "Call Officer Martinez, tell her it's happening again." "Victoria, please." David grabbed her arm, his eyes wide with concern. "These men, last week they put 2 street vendors in the hospital. The police come, take reports, but nothing changes. No one can stop them." "That's where you're wrong," Victoria replied, her voice carrying the quiet confidence that had steadied her teams through the worst firefights in Fallujah. "No one has stopped them yet." The Road Demons had chosen Riverside Commons as their latest conquest, seeing only easy targets: families, elderly instructors, teenage performers just wanting to share their music. They never expected to encounter someone who'd spent 20 years mastering the art of asymmetric warfare, someone trained to neutralize threats with precision and strategy, someone who understood that true combat effectiveness comes not from intimidation, but from knowing exactly when and how to strike. Victoria watched as Butcher and his crew approached a group of young street musicians near the amphitheater, their intimidating presence causing the teenagers to back away in fear. Her jaw tightened as memories of similar scenes flashed through her mind. Insurgents terrorizing local villages, watching fear spread through communities until people became prisoners in their own homes. Not here. Not in her community. As Victoria moved toward the confrontation, her mind was already mapping out scenarios, assessing tactical advantages, analyzing potential threats with the same precision that had made her one of the Marine Corps' most effective reconnaissance operators. The road demons thought they were about to teach these civilians another lesson about their new order. Instead, they were about to learn the difference between terrorizing innocent people and facing someone trained to dismantle entire enemy networks. Through the growing twilight, Victoria noted every detail of the unfolding situation. The teenagers, 3 boys with guitars and a girl with a violin case, had been regulars in the park for months, their music bringing joy to evening visitors. Now they huddled together, backs against the amphitheater wall, as the bikers closed in with predatory intent. "Well, what do we have here?" Butcher's voice carried across the park, slurred but menacing. "Looks like someone hasn't heard about the new performance fees in our park." His crew laughed, spreading out to block any escape routes. Victoria analyzed their formation with practiced efficiency. Butcher, approximately 6 feet 5 inches, 280 pounds, favoring his left leg, possibly an old injury. Razor and Spike flanked the musicians from the right, while Ghost and Tank moved to cut off the path to the parking lot. Wire hung back, his hand resting too casually near his jacket pocket. The young violinist clutched her instrument case closer, her voice trembling but defiant. "We're just playing music, we're not hurting anyone." "Playing music in our territory," Butcher growled, taking another step forward. "That means you pay for protection. Or maybe we need to show you what happens to people who don't understand the new rules." "Actually," Victoria's voice cut through the tension, clear and controlled, "they're not paying anything." The road demons turned, initially amused that a lone woman in running clothes would dare interrupt their intimidation routine. But something in her stance, her unwavering gaze, made them hesitate. Butcher's bloodshot eyes narrowed as he studied her, his alcohol-addled brain trying to process why warning signals were suddenly screaming in his mind. "Look what we got here, boys," he sneered, trying to maintain his authority. "Some jogger thinks she's gonna play hero." Victoria noted how the other bikers subtly adjusted their positions, their movements confirming her initial assessment. These men had military training, probably special forces gone bad. They were instinctively moving to tactical positions, even in their intoxicated state. "The kids are leaving," she stated calmly. "You're leaving. This ends now." Butcher's amusement turned to rage. Nobody challenged the road demons, especially not some woman half his size. He stepped forward, attempting to use his bulk to intimidate. "Maybe you need to learn about respect." His words cut off as Victoria moved, years of combat training taking over. Before Butcher could react, she had his arm locked behind his back, his face pressed against the amphitheater wall. The movement was fluid, precise, almost casual in its efficiency. "First lesson," Victoria said quietly, maintaining the hold with minimal effort. "Respect isn't earned through fear." The other demons stood frozen, shocked by how quickly their leader had been neutralized. Wire reached slowly toward his jacket, but Victoria's voice stopped him cold. "I wouldn't," she warned, applying slightly more pressure to Butcher's arm. "Your friend here is already facing multiple charges, drunk and disorderly, attempted assault, criminal threatening. How many more would you like to add?" Tank, who had been studying Victoria more carefully than the others, suddenly grabbed Wire's arm. "Hold up," he muttered, recognition dawning in his eyes. "Look at how she moves. Military." "Marine Force Recon," Victoria confirmed, her voice carrying the quiet authority that had commanded respect in war zones across the globe. "4 tours in Iraq. Want to guess how many times I've dealt with threats bigger than you?" The sound of approaching sirens cut through the evening air. Officer Martinez's patrol car pulled into the parking lot, followed by 2 more units. Through their monitored channel, they watched the impact of her psychological warfare. Morrison's team frantically transmitted data to offshore servers, unknowingly using channels Sarah's team had compromised. Blackwood's associates made final attempts to contact political protectors who had already abandoned them. Snake's crew, sensing their vulnerability, became more aggressive. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Through the growing dusk at Riverside Commons, Victoria studied the unfolding scene with the same tactical precision that had served her through countless reconnaissance missions. The road demons were displaying classic signs of a coordinated criminal operation, not just random intimidation. Their practiced formations, their systematic targeting of park vendors and performers, their methodical expansion of territory, it all pointed to something more organized than simple gang violence. David Chen had retreated to the community center as instructed, but Victoria noticed how other park regulars were emerging from hiding, watching the confrontation from behind trees and benches. She saw Miguel Rodriguez, the popular food truck vendor who'd been paying protection money for weeks. Sarah Kim, the yoga instructor who'd moved her classes online after being threatened. The Martinez family, who'd stopped bringing their children to the playground after dark. All of them watching, hope mixing with fear in their eyes. "Here's what happens next," Victoria announced, her voice carrying the authority that had commanded elite reconnaissance teams. "You're all going to put your hands where Officer Martinez can see them. You're going to cooperate fully. Then we're going to have a very interesting conversation about your recent activities in this park." Butcher struggled against her hold, but Victoria's grip remained unbreakable. "You have no idea what you're starting," he growled. "We've got connections. By morning, we'll be out. And then, by morning," Victoria cut him off. "Your connections won't matter. See, you made a crucial mistake. You thought you were just dealing with civilians. You never stopped to ask why certain incidents went uninvestigated, why some officers always looked the other way, why your protection racket went unchallenged." Officer Elena Martinez approached with handcuffs ready. Victoria noticed how the young officer positioned herself, maintaining tactical awareness despite her youth. Good. They'd need allies like her for what was coming. "Your second mistake," Victoria continued as Martinez secured Butcher, "was assuming I was just out for an evening run. 3 months I've been watching, documenting patterns, tracking your movements, every threat, every shakedown, every accident that mysteriously had no witnesses. Force Recon isn't just about combat. It's about understanding enemy operations, identifying vulnerabilities, and knowing exactly when to strike." The other road demons were being cuffed now, their bravado crumbling as they realized how completely they'd misread the situation. Victoria watched as Officer Martinez searched wire, noting how the young cop's hands never trembled despite the biker's continued threats. "Your biggest mistake," Victoria moved closer, her voice low enough that only Butcher could hear, "was thinking fear was your greatest weapon. You never understood that real power comes from protecting others, not terrorizing them. Now you're about to learn just how powerful a community can be when it stops being afraid." As the road demons were led to waiting patrol cars, Victoria noticed movement in the growing crowd of onlookers. People were emerging from the community center, from behind the carefully maintained gardens where they'd hidden from the gang's presence. She saw hope replacing fear in their eyes, courage replacing resignation. David Chen approached, tears streaming down his face. "Victoria, they'll be back. They always come back." "No," Victoria replied, watching as the patrol cars pulled away. "They won't. Because this isn't just about today's arrests. This is about exposing everything. Their operations, their connections, their entire network. By targeting this park, they didn't just pick a fight with me. They gave us the key to dismantling their whole organization." Her phone buzzed with a text from her FBI contact, Special Agent Torres. "Meeting in 20. You need to see what we found on their leader." Victoria smiled grimly. The road demons thought they were untouchable, protected by corruption and fear. They never realized they'd been under surveillance by someone trained to see patterns others missed, Someone who understood that the best way to defeat an enemy was to understand them completely before striking. The war for Riverside Commons was just beginning, and Victoria Ramirez was about to show them why you never bring street tactics to a Force Recon fight. She looked around at the park she'd come to love, the riverside trails where families should be walking freely, the amphitheater where young musicians should be sharing their art, the fishing dock where generations had passed down their knowledge. This wasn't just about stopping criminals. This was about reclaiming something precious, something worth fighting for. And Major Victoria Vic Ramirez had just begun to fight. 20 minutes later, Victoria sat in Special Agent Torres's office, studying the files spread across his desk. Crime scene photos, surveillance reports, financial records, pieces of a puzzle she'd been assembling for months. The office windows offered a clear view of Riverside Commons, the park's lamplights beginning to illuminate the growing darkness. "You were right," Torres said, sliding another folder toward her. Butcher, real name Robert Butch Kowalski, isn't just some drunk biker. Former Delta Force, dishonorably discharged after an incident in Afghanistan. The road demons aren't randomly targeting the park. They're establishing distribution points. Victoria examined a map marked with recent gang activity. The park's location makes it ideal. Multiple access routes, clear sight lines, heavy civilian traffic to mask their operations. Classic insurgent tactics. Hide in plain sight. That's not all, Torres continued, pulling up more files on his computer. Remember those connections Butcher bragged about? We're looking at corruption reaching into the department. Officers mysteriously reassigned, evidence disappearing, witnesses suddenly changing their stories. Victoria's jaw tightened as she connected more dots. The protection racket is just a cover. They're building infrastructure for something bigger. The intimidation, the violence. It's about controlling territory, establishing dominance. I've seen this pattern before, usually preceding major drug operations. A knock at the door interrupted them. Officer Martinez entered, her young face tight with concern. "You need to see this," she said, handing Victoria her phone. "They're already making moves." The screen showed social media posts, threats against the park's regular visitors, Victoria's photo with a target drawn over it, messages promising retribution. The road demons were trying to reassert control through fear. "They're scared," Victoria noted, studying the messages. "These aren't calculated threats, they're desperate. We disrupted their timeline, forced them to reveal their hand." "That makes them more dangerous," Torres warned, running a hand through his graying hair. "Scared criminals make mistakes, but they also get reckless. They might accelerate their plans, try to establish dominance through extreme violence." Victoria stood, moving to the office window. The city lights sparkled below, peaceful from this distance, but she knew better. Every light represented families, homes, lives vulnerable to the poison the road demons were bringing. "What's our next move?" Martinez asked, her voice carrying the eagerness of youth tempered by recent experience. "We flipped the script," Victoria replied, her tactical mind already formulating strategies. "They expect retaliation, direct confrontation. Instead, we go after their infrastructure. Every bank account, every property deed, every business connection. In Iraq, I learned that you don't defeat an insurgency by fighting battles. You defeat it by cutting off its support system." Torres nodded slowly. "I've got contacts in financial crimes, DEA task force. But Victoria, these guys, they've got people inside the department. The moment we start digging, they'll know." "Good," Victoria smiled grimly. "Let them know. Let them waste resources trying to protect their assets while we identify their weak points. Force Recon isn't just about gathering information. It's about making the enemy react exactly how you want them to." Her phone buzzed again. David Chen calling from the park. "Victoria, they're here, not the leaders, but they're soldiers. They're marking territory, threatening vendors. Mr. Rodriguez's food truck, they broke the windows." Victoria's voice remained calm, but her eyes hardened. "Get everyone inside. Lock down the community center. We're on our way." As they headed for their vehicles, Martinez asked the question that had been bothering her. Why the park? With their resources, their connections, Why focus so much on one neighborhood park? Because it's not about the park, Victoria explained, checking her tactical vest. It's about what it represents. Community, connection, hope. Break that. Make people too afraid to gather, to resist, and you control more than territory. You control their spirit. The drive back to Riverside Commons was tense with anticipation. Victoria knew the road demons would be expecting them, probably had lookouts posted. But she also knew something they didn't. She wasn't just responding to their show of force. She was manipulating them into revealing their entire command structure. As they approached, Victoria spotted 3 motorcycles outside Rodriguez's food truck, their riders vandalizing the already broken windows. Community members watched from behind curtains, their fear palpable even from a distance. "Remember," Victoria instructed Martinez and Torres, "we're not just making arrests. Every person we take down, every threat they make becomes evidence. We're not fighting thugs. We're documenting a criminal conspiracy." The road demons spotted their approach, scrambling for their bikes. They weren't the hardened leadership, just street soldiers trying to prove themselves. Victoria noted their movements, their reactions, adding each detail to her growing operational picture. This wasn't just about protecting a park anymore. It was about exposing a criminal empire that had grown too confident, too comfortable in its perceived invulnerability. The road demons thought they were fighting a simple turf war. They were about to learn they had started a battle with someone who had spent years dismantling organizations far more dangerous than theirs. And Major Victoria Ramirez was just getting started. Back at her apartment, Victoria transformed her living room into an operations center. Maps covered the walls, surveillance photos connected with red string, financial records spread across every surface. 3 laptops displayed different data streams, police frequencies, traffic camera feeds, and a complex pattern recognition algorithm she'd developed during her Force Recon days. "It's bigger than we thought," Torres said, studying a newly uncovered money trail. "The road demons aren't just running drugs. They're moving weapons, controlling construction contracts, infiltrating legitimate businesses. The park is just one piece of a larger operation." Victoria nodded, marking another location on her map. Classic cellular structure. Each group operates independently, minimal contact with other cells. That's why local law enforcement could never see the full picture. They were only catching glimpses of individual operations. Officer Martinez entered, carrying fresh coffee and a stack of new reports. 2 more vendors were attacked at the park today, but something's different. The soldiers doing the intimidation, they're not the usual crew. These guys are professionals. Military training, coordinated movements. They're bringing in their elite teams, Victoria explained, pulling up surveillance footage. Butcher's arrest forced them to accelerate their timeline. Instead of slowly taking control through fear, they're moving to direct action. But that's where they made their first major mistake. She pointed to patterns on her map. "See these movements? The new teams are sloppy, leaving traces. Bank withdrawals, vehicle rentals, supply requisitions. They're so focused on showing force that they're exposing their entire logistics network." Torres's phone buzzed. A text from his FBI contact. "Victoria, you need to see this. Remember those corrupted officers we suspected? It goes higher, way higher. Judges, city officials, even state-level connections." Victoria's military training kicked in, analyzing the new information with cold precision. That's their second mistake. By activating their protection network, they're revealing everyone who's compromised. Every official who suddenly blocks our investigation. Every judge who throws out our warrants. They're identifying themselves as part of the conspiracy. A crash outside interrupted their discussion. Victoria moved to the window, noting 2 motorcycles speeding away. Her front yard had been vandalized, a crude threat painted across her garage door. "You're dead, Marine." "They're trying to intimidate you," Martinez said, her hand instinctively moving to her weapon. "No," Victoria replied calmly, taking photos of the vandalism. "They're showing us their desperation. Professional criminals don't make threats, they act. This," she gestured to the graffiti. "This is fear. They know we're close to something big." Her laptop pinged. Facial recognition had identified one of the vandals. Got you, Victoria murmured, pulling up his file. Former Navy SEAL, discharged for conduct unbecoming, now works security for one of the Road Demons' front companies. How does this help us? Martinez asked, studying the file. Every person they send after us creates another connection we can trace. Military-trained operators don't work cheap. Someone's paying them. Those payments leave trails. Trails lead to accounts. Accounts lead to the people really in charge. Torres whistled softly, finally seeing the bigger picture. You're not just investigating their crimes. You're mapping their entire organization. In Iraq, I learned that defeating an enemy isn't about winning firefights. It's about understanding their structure so completely that you can dismantle it piece by piece. Victoria pulled up another file. The Road Demons think they're fighting a territorial battle. They don't realize they're facing someone who spent years taking apart insurgent networks. Her phone rang. David Chen from the park. Victoria, something's happening. Black SUVs just pulled up. Men in suits, not bikers. They're meeting with the new crew, looking at plans or maps. Right on schedule, Victoria smiled grimly. Martinez, get your surveillance team in position. Torres, alert your FBI contact. The real players are finally showing themselves. As they moved to respond, Victoria studied her wall of evidence. The Road Demons had built their criminal empire on fear and corruption, thinking their military background made them untouchable. They never expected to encounter someone who understood their tactics, who could turn their own methods against them. A text message lit up her phone. Last chance, Marine. Walk away, or we burn everything you care about. Victoria's response was simple. You should have thought about walking away when you had the chance. The war for Riverside Commons was entering a new phase. The Road Demons had started this fight thinking they were the predators. They were about to learn they had become the prey. The black SUVs circled Riverside Commons like vultures, their tinted windows concealing the men Victoria knew were studying every entrance, every escape route, every tactical advantage. Through her surveillance feed, she watched the Road Demons management team conducting their assessment, their movements precise, professional, a stark contrast to the drunk bikers who'd started this war. Got facial recognition hits, Martinez reported, monitoring the feeds. 2 former CIA contractors, 1 ex-Navy SEAL operations chief. These aren't street thugs, Victoria. These are serious operators. Good, Victoria replied, marking their positions on her map. Professional contractors mean professional payments. Every dollar they spend creates a trail we can follow. Torres burst in, his face flushed with excitement. You were right. Those bank records you flagged led us to a shell company. The shell company led to an investment firm. The investment firm led to someone who should be untouchable. Marcus Blackwood, Victoria finished, pulling up a file on her laptop. Former Army intelligence colonel, now sits on 5 corporate boards. On paper, he's a respected businessman. In reality, he's the one really running the Road Demons. Finally connecting the dots, Torres whispered. The bikers, the drugs, the protection rackets. They're just the visible part of the operation. Victoria nodded, adding another red string to her evidence wall. Classic intelligence strategy. Create visible threats to distract from the real power structure. The drunk bikers terrorizing the park are just a smokescreen for a much more sophisticated criminal enterprise. Her phone buzzed. Another text from an unknown number. You're impressive, Marine. Let's talk. Name your price. They're trying to buy you off, Martinez said, reading the message. No, Victoria corrected. It means they still don't understand what they're dealing with. They think everyone has a price because they've never encountered someone fighting for something money can't buy. The surveillance feed showed more movement at the park. The professional contractors were organizing the local Road Demons into structured teams, establishing patrol routes, setting up observation posts. They were fortifying their position, preparing for a siege. They're transforming the park into a forward operating base, Victoria explained, recognizing military tactics she'd seen overseas. Converting public spaces into defensible positions, establishing lines of sight, controlling civilian movement patterns. How do we stop them? Martinez asked. watching helplessly as families were intimidated away from their neighborhood park. "We don't," Victoria smiled grimly. "We let them build their fortress. Every camera they install, every patrol route they establish, every piece of equipment they bring in, it all becomes evidence. They think they're securing their territory. They're actually documenting their own criminal enterprise." Torres's phone rang, his FBI contact again. "Victoria, remember those offshore accounts you traced? They don't just lead to Blackwood. We're seeing connections to politicians, prosecutors, even federal agents. This is bigger than we thought." "No," Victoria replied calmly. "It's exactly as big as I expected. Criminal empires this sophisticated don't exist without high-level protection." Through her window, Victoria spotted 2 motorcycles passing by. Obvious surveillance meant to intimidate. She noted their patrol pattern, adding it to her growing operational picture. "They're watching us," Martinez observed nervously. "Let them watch," Victoria said, moving another marker on her map. "While they're focused on us, our surveillance teams are identifying their safe houses, tracking their shipments, documenting their entire operation. In intelligence work, sometimes the best way to gather information is to let the enemy think they're in control." Her laptop pinged. Another face match from the park surveillance. "Well, well," she murmured, studying the image. "Look who just joined the party. James Wilson, former NSA cybersecurity expert, now working as a consultant for one of Blackwood's companies." "Why would they bring in someone like that?" Martinez asked. "Because they finally realize what they're up against," Victoria explained. "They thought this was a simple turf war. Now they understand they're facing someone who knows how to dismantle entire networks. They're bringing in their best people, trying to protect their operation." "Won't that make them more dangerous?" Torres worried. "It makes them more predictable," Victoria corrected. "Professional operators follow established protocols. Those protocols become patterns. Patterns can be analyzed, predicted, and exploited." Her phone buzzed with another message from David Chen. "Victoria, they're setting up some kind of command center in the old boathouse. Heavy equipment, satellite dishes, armed guards." "Perfect," Victoria smiled. "They're consolidating their resources, centralizing their operation. They think they're establishing a stronghold. Instead, they're putting all their evidence in one place." The war for Riverside Commons was evolving. What started as drunk bikers terrorizing civilians had exposed a criminal empire that had operated in shadows for years. The road demons thought bringing in professional operators would protect them. Instead, they were about to learn why Force Recon was more dangerous than any weapon, and Victoria Ramirez was just getting started. Night fell over Riverside Commons, but the darkness brought no peace. Floodlights mounted by the road demons' security teams cast harsh shadows across once peaceful paths. Armed patrols moved in practiced formations while surveillance equipment scanned for threats. The park had become a military outpost, its transformation as complete as it was disturbing. Victoria watched through her tactical feeds as James Wilson, the former NSA expert, directed the installation of sophisticated monitoring equipment. "They're establishing a surveillance network," she explained to Martinez and Torres. "High-end thermal cameras, signal interceptors, motion sensors." "Can they detect our surveillance?" Martinez asked, worried about their own observation posts. "They already have," Victoria replied calmly. "That's exactly what I wanted." Torres looked confused. "You wanted them to find our cameras?" "In intelligence work, sometimes you have to let the enemy think they've won," Victoria explained, pulling up new data streams on her laptop. "While they're focused on finding and disabling our obvious surveillance, they don't notice the secondary systems we've hidden throughout the park." Her phone buzzed. Another message from Marcus Blackwood. "Impressive setup you had. Shame about those cameras. Ready to discuss terms?" Victoria's response was calculated. "Cameras are replaceable, evidence isn't." "What evidence?" Wilson's voice crackled through their compromised communication channel. "James Wilson," Victoria spoke into her comm unit, knowing they were listening. "Former NSA, specialized in cybersecurity, discharged after suspected ties to foreign actors. Now working as a security consultant while managing digital operations for several offshore accounts linked to criminal enterprises." Silence filled the channel, then, "How did you—" The same way I know about Operation Nightshade, Victoria continued. The same way I know about the connections to Colonel Marcus Blackwood, the offshore accounts, the compromised officials. You're good at digital security, James, but I spent 20 years tracking people who thought they could hide behind encryption. Martinez watched in amazement as panic spread through the Road Demons command center. Through their feeds, they could see Wilson frantically checking systems, trying to trace the leak. They still don't understand, Victoria explained. They think this is about surveillance and counter-surveillance. They don't realize every move they make, every piece of equipment they install. Every encrypted message they send becomes evidence of a criminal conspiracy. Torres's phone lit up with urgent news. Victoria, Blackwood's making moves. He's activated his entire network. Judges issuing emergency orders, police units being reassigned, bank records being sealed. Right on schedule, Victoria smiled grimly. When criminals feel trapped, they reach out to their protection network. Every official who suddenly takes action against us identifies themselves as part of the conspiracy. Through their surveillance, they watched as more vehicles arrived at the park. Not just bikers now, but suited men carrying briefcases, technical experts with sophisticated equipment, even uniformed officers who'd chosen the wrong side. They're consolidating their resources, Martinez observed. They're making their final mistake, Victoria corrected. By bringing everyone together, they're creating a single target. Every corrupt official, every compromised cop, every criminal operator in one place. Her laptop pinged with facial recognition identifying the new arrivals, each match adding another thread to her evidence wall, another connection in the criminal network she'd spent months mapping. Victoria, Torres said quietly, these people, they don't just break laws, they make them. They control judges, politicians, law enforcement. How do we fight that kind of power? The same way I fought insurgents who controlled entire regions, Victoria replied, studying her tactical displays. You don't attack their strength, you expose their vulnerabilities. Every person they bring in to protect them actually makes them weaker. Every resource they deploy creates another point of failure. Her phone buzzed again. Wilson trying a different approach. You were Force Recon. You understand how this works. Name your price. Everyone has one. Victoria's response was simple. That's why you'll lose. You think everything has a price. You never understood that some things are worth more than money. Through their feeds, they watched the Road Demons transforming Riverside Commons into a fortress. Security teams established perimeters. Technical experts set up electronic countermeasures. Corrupted officials arrived to provide their protection. They thought they were creating an impregnable defense. They didn't realize they were walking into a trap 3 months in the making. The war for Riverside Commons was reaching its climax. The Road Demons had gathered their full strength, thinking they could overwhelm any opposition through sheer force. They were about to learn why Force Recon operators were more dangerous than any army, and Victoria Ramirez was ready to spring her trap. Dawn broke over Riverside Commons, revealing the full extent of its transformation. Security checkpoints controlled every entrance, armed guards patrolled established routes, and sophisticated surveillance equipment scanned for threats. The Road Demons had created their fortress, but in doing so, they'd sealed their own fate. Satellite uplink is active, Wilson reported through their monitored channel. We've got full spectrum coverage, signal intercept, thermal imaging. Nothing moves in this park without us seeing it. Victoria watched through her own feeds as the former NSA expert coordinated his technical teams. That's $4 million in equipment they've installed, she noted to Torres, all paid for through traceable accounts. How does that help us? Martinez asked, monitoring police frequencies. They've got better technology, more manpower, and half the department on their payroll. Because they're thinking like soldiers, Victoria explained, marking another position on her map. They're fortifying positions, establishing fields of fire, controlling access points. But this isn't a military operation. It's a criminal enterprise. Every defensive measure they take creates evidence we can use. Her phone lit up with a message from Blackwood. Impressive operation you're running, but it ends today. Last chance to walk away. Victoria's response was calculated. You should see the operation I'm not showing you. The message had its intended effect. Through their surveillance, They watched panic spread through the Road Demons command center. Wilson ordered additional scans, paranoid about hidden threats. Security teams doubled their patrols, burning through resources and manpower. "They're scared," Torres observed. "They're reactive," Victoria corrected. "Fear makes criminals predictable. Watch." On cue, more vehicles arrived at the park, not just security teams now, but financial advisors, lawyers, even politicians coming to assess the situation personally. Each new arrival was photographed, identified, and added to Victoria's growing evidence wall. "I don't understand," Martinez said. "Why would they risk exposing themselves like this?" "Because they think they're untouchable," Victoria explained. "Criminals who've operated with impunity for years don't know how to handle real opposition. They're used to solving problems with money or violence. When that doesn't work, they panic." Her laptop pinged with facial recognition identifying another arrival. "Senator William Hayes," Victoria noted. "Head of the State Security Committee, recently approved contracts worth millions to companies linked to the Road Demons." Torres whistled softly. "This goes higher than we thought." "No," Victoria corrected. "It goes exactly as high as I expected. Criminal empires don't survive without political protection. But by coming here personally, the senator just gave us documentary evidence of his connection to a criminal organization." Through their feeds, they watched Wilson's technical team sweeping the park for surveillance devices. They found and disabled dozens of cameras, listening devices, and tracking systems, all deliberately planted by Victoria's team. "They think they're winning," Victoria explained. "Every device they find convinces them they're in control. They don't realize the real surveillance isn't electronic." "What do you mean?" Martinez asked. Victoria pulled up another data stream, hundreds of photographs, videos, and written statements from park residents. While they're focused on technology, the community has been documenting everything. Every threat, every bribe, every illegal operation. Wilson can disable cameras, but he can't erase the evidence we've been gathering for months. Her phone buzzed. Wilson again. "Found your backup systems." "Nice try, but it's over." "James," Victoria replied, "you still don't understand what you're really fighting. This isn't about surveillance or counter-surveillance. It's about something you can't hack, can't bribe, and can't intimidate." "And what's that?" Wilson demanded. "Community," Victoria answered. "Every person you've terrorized, every family you've threatened, every business you've extorted, they're all witnesses now. And witnesses aren't like computer systems, you can't just delete their evidence." Through their surveillance, they watched the impact of her words. Wilson frantically ordered more scans, while Blackwood gathered his advisors for urgent consultations. The Road Demons had spent millions fortifying their position, only to realize they'd overlooked the most basic element of intelligence gathering: human sources. "Victoria," Torres said quietly, "they'll try to silence witnesses, destroy evidence, eliminate anyone who can testify." "That's exactly what I'm counting on," Victoria smiled grimly. "Because witness intimidation is a federal crime. Every threat they make, every attempt at coercion just adds to our case." Her laptop pinged again. More facial recognition matches, more connections added to her evidence wall. The Road Demons had transformed Riverside Commons into a fortress, thinking they were creating an impregnable defense. Instead, they'd created the perfect stage for their own exposure. The war for Riverside Commons was approaching its climax. The criminals had gathered their strength, thinking they could overwhelm any opposition through technology and force. They were about to learn why the most dangerous weapon in intelligence work wasn't surveillance equipment or firepower. It was the truth. And Victoria Ramirez was about to reveal everything. Night fell over Riverside Commons, transforming the once peaceful space into a maze of shadows and harsh floodlights. From her observation post, Victoria watched the Road Demons' fortress through thermal imaging. Dozens of heat signatures moved in coordinated patterns. Security teams patrolling their self-declared territory, technical experts monitoring their surveillance systems, corrupted officials coming and going from the command center they'd established in the old boathouse. Movement at the north entrance, Martinez reported through their secure channel. 3 SUVs, diplomatic plates. They're bringing in international players now. Victoria adjusted her surveillance feed, focusing on the new arrivals. Cartel representatives, she noted, recognizing patterns in their security detail. The road demons aren't just running local operations. They're part of a global network. Torres burst in, his face grave. Victoria, we've got problems. Judge Harrison just signed emergency orders freezing our investigation. FBI is being pressured to back off, and Internal Affairs is suddenly investigating Martinez. Right on schedule, Victoria replied calmly, adding new markers to her tactical display. They're activating every asset they have, calling in every favor, trying to bury this before it explodes. Her phone buzzed. Wilson again. Your surveillance is compromised, your investigation is shut down, and your police contacts are being neutralized. Still think you can win? Victoria's response was deliberate. You just proved you're monitoring police communications, interfering with federal investigations, and abusing judicial authority. Thank you for the evidence. Through their feeds, they watched Wilson's reaction in the command center. The former NSA expert slammed his fist on a desk, realizing too late that his threat had actually strengthened their case. They're getting desperate, Martinez observed, watching more vehicles arrive at the park. That means they're making mistakes, Victoria corrected. Look at their response, bringing in cartel connections, exposing corrupt officials, demonstrating their influence over law enforcement. Everything they do to stop us just proves how deep the corruption goes. Her laptop pinged with alerts from multiple sources, news agencies receiving anonymous tips about police corruption, financial regulators finding suspicious patterns in seemingly legitimate businesses, federal investigators discovering links between street-level crime and high-level politics. I don't understand, Torres said. We're supposedly shut down. How is all this information getting out? Victoria smiled, pulling up another screen. Because while they were focused on official channels, we built our own network. Every community member they threatened, every business they extorted, every honest cop they tried to silence, they're all part of our operation now. Through their surveillance, they watched the Road Demons command center erupt in chaos. Wilson's teams detected simultaneous information leaks from dozens of sources. Blackwood's legal experts scrambled to contain the damage. Corrupt officials frantically tried to cover their connections. They thought they could control the narrative through force and fear, Victoria explained. They never understood that real intelligence work isn't about gathering information. It's about knowing when to release it. Her phone lit up with another message from Blackwood. What do you want? Name your terms. We can make this all go away. You still don't understand what you're fighting, Victoria replied. This isn't about negotiation. It's about justice. In the park, the Road Demons security teams increased their patrols, their movements becoming more aggressive. Through thermal imaging, Victoria watched them harassing local residents, searching vehicles, demanding identification from anyone who approached their perimeter. They're showing their true nature now, Martinez noted, dropping the pretense of legitimate security. Because they're cornered, Victoria explained. And cornered criminals always return to what they know best, violence and intimidation. Watch what happens next. On cue, more motorcycles roared into the park. Not the professional security teams this time, but the original Road Demons, Butcher's crew, fresh from jail thanks to their corrupted contacts. Their arrival changed the atmosphere immediately, adding an element of chaos to the previously disciplined operation. You're letting them bring in more muscle? Torres asked, concerned. I'm letting them demonstrate the connection between street-level thugs and corporate criminals, Victoria corrected. Every time they show their complete organization, from bikers to businessmen, they prove it's all one criminal enterprise. Her surveillance feeds captured everything. Butcher's crew threatening local residents, Wilson's teams monitoring communications, Blackwood's associates conducting business in the command center. Each image, each interaction, each demonstration of their integrated operation became evidence. Victoria, Martinez said quietly, they're targeting families now, using Butcher's crew to terrorize anyone they suspect of helping us. I know, Victoria replied, her voice tight. That's why we've already evacuated key witnesses to safe houses. The people they're threatening now are our own undercover teams. Through their feeds, they watched the road demons trying to reassert control through brute force. But every act of intimidation was documented, every threat recorded, every connection between street violence and corporate crime captured and cataloged. They're playing exactly into our hands, Victoria explained, updating her evidence wall. Every time they escalate, they prove our case. The bikers provide muscle, Wilson provides technical support, Blackwood provides political protection. One criminal organization operating at all levels. Her laptop pinged with more alerts. Federal agents receiving anonymous evidence packages, journalists getting leaked documents, financial investigators finding clear patterns of money laundering and corruption. The war for Riverside Commons was reaching its tipping point. The road demons had gathered their full strength, but their very show of force was becoming their undoing. And Victoria Ramirez was about to deliver the final blow. Dawn approached Riverside Commons with an eerie stillness. The road demons' floodlights cast stark shadows across their fortified position, while thermal cameras tracked every movement in their self-declared territory. But something had changed. The organized precision of their operation was cracking, replaced by the chaos of desperation. Multiple vehicles approaching from the south, Martinez reported, monitoring their surveillance feeds. Heavy transport trucks, military grade, they're bringing in serious hardware now. Victoria tracked the new arrivals through her tactical display. Not bringing in, moving out. Those are evacuation vehicles. They're preparing to abandon the operation. Through their cameras, they watched Wilson's technical teams hastily dismantling equipment while Blackwood's associates shredded documents in the command center. Butcher's crew had grown more aggressive, their intimidation tactics becoming increasingly violent as they sensed their protection crumbling. "I don't understand," Torres said. "They still have their connections, their corrupt officials, their political protection. Why run?" "Because they finally realized what they're really facing," Victoria explained, pulling up multiple data streams on her laptop. "Watch." Her screen displayed dozens of simultaneous operations unfolding across the city. FBI teams raiding shell companies, DEA agents seizing hidden assets, federal marshals executing warrants on corrupt officials. The road demons' entire support network was being systematically dismantled. "This isn't just about the park anymore," Victoria continued. "While they were focused on fortifying their position here, we were mapping their entire organization. Every security measure they installed helped us identify their capabilities. Every person they brought in revealed another connection. Every threat they made exposed another criminal enterprise." Her phone lit up with a message from Wilson. "How?" "We controlled everything. Communications, surveillance, law enforcement." "That was your mistake," Victoria replied. "You thought control meant security. You never understood that real intelligence work isn't about controlling information. It's about understanding it." Through their feeds, they watched panic spread through the road demons' command center. Wilson's sophisticated security systems, designed to protect them from surveillance, had instead documented their entire operation. Every encrypted communication, every financial transaction, every meeting with corrupt officials, all captured and cataloged. "They're trying to destroy evidence," Martinez noted, watching teams frantically burning documents and smashing hard drives. "Let them try," Victoria smiled grimly. "Everything they're destroying has already been backed up, verified, and distributed to multiple federal agencies. Their attempts to hide evidence just prove consciousness of guilt." Torres's phone buzzed urgently, his FBI contact with breaking news. "Victoria, it's bigger than we thought. The road demons aren't just a local operation. They're part of an international criminal network. Drug cartels, weapons smuggling, human trafficking." "I know," Victoria replied calmly. "Why do you think I let them bring in their cartel connections? Every international player they contacted helped us map their global organization." Her tactical display showed more vehicles arriving at the park, not evacuating now, but reinforcing. The road demons were calling in every asset they had, preparing for a last stand in their fortified position. "They're going to fight," Martinez worried, watching heavily armed men taking defensive positions. "No, Victoria corrected. They're going to fail, because while they're focusing on military tactics, they've forgotten the most basic rule of survival: never let your enemy choose the battlefield. Through their surveillance, they watched Butcher's crew setting up barricades while Wilson's teams established electronic countermeasures. Blackwood himself had arrived, coordinating with attorneys and corrupt officials in a desperate attempt to contain the situation. "This is it," Victoria announced, activating her secure communication channel. "All teams execute Operation Daybreak." Suddenly, the park lighting system failed, plunging the Road Demon's fortress into darkness. Their backup generators kicked in, but those too went dark seconds later. Wilson's sophisticated surveillance equipment, dependent on the power grid, became useless. "What's happening?" Martinez asked, watching chaos spread through enemy ranks. "We're not just fighting criminals," Victoria explained. "We're dismantling an infrastructure. Every system they installed, every security measure they implemented. We learned to control them all." Her phone lit up with desperate messages from Wilson. "How are you doing this?" "Our systems are failing." "Because you built your fortress on our battlefield," Victoria replied. "Every power line you tapped, every communication channel you used, every security system you installed. We let you build it all on infrastructure we already controlled. Through night vision feeds, they watched the Road Demon's operation collapse into chaos. Without their technology, without their surveillance, without their coordinated communications, they were just criminals hiding in a dark park." The final phase of Victoria's plan was about to begin, and the Road Demons were about to learn why you never challenge Force Recon on their own turf. Through their night vision feeds, they watched the Road Demon's operation fracturing under pressure. Butcher and his bikers wanted to fight their way out, relying on brute force and intimidation. Wilson's security contractors advocated for a tactical retreat, trying to preserve their professional reputation. Blackwood's corporate allies demanded legal intervention, still believing their political connections could save them. "They're turning on each other," Martinez observed, watching arguments escalate into physical confrontations. "Because they've lost their illusion of invincibility," Victoria explained. "Criminal enterprises like this survive on the myth of their own power. Once that cracks, the entire structure begins to collapse." Her phone buzzed with increasingly desperate messages from Wilson. "We can still negotiate. I have files on federal operations, classified intelligence. Think about your career. We can make you rich, powerful." From Butcher, "You're dead, Marine. No matter what happens, we'll find you." Victoria's responses were calculated to deepen their divisions. To Wilson, "Federal prosecutors love when criminals offer classified documents as bribes." To Blackwood, "Money doesn't protect from RICO charges." To Butcher, "Threats just add years to your sentence." Through their feeds, they watched the impact of her psychological warfare. Wilson's team began destroying evidence, realizing their sophisticated security measures had only documented their crimes. Blackwood's associates started making calls to their attorneys, each looking to cut deals to save themselves. Butcher's crew, sensing their protection crumbling, became more violent, turning their aggression on their own allies. "Victoria," Torres warned, "they're getting desperate. Desperate criminals are unpredictable." "No," she corrected. "They're entirely predictable. Watch what happens next." On cue, more vehicles arrived at the park. Not reinforcements this time, but private security contractors hired by Blackwood's corporate allies. They weren't coming to help. They were coming to clean up evidence, to eliminate any trace of connection between street-level crimes and corporate corruption. "Perfect," Victoria smiled grimly. "Now we have documented proof of conspiracy to obstruct justice." Her tactical display showed the full scope of what was unfolding. The Road Demon's fortress had become a perfect case study in organized crime. Street thugs provided muscle, professional contractors handled security, corporate allies managed finances, corrupted officials provided protection, all working together, all exposed now in brilliant daylight. "Teams in position," Martinez reported, "awaiting your signal." "Not yet," Victoria replied, watching events unfold. "Let them reveal everything." Through their surveillance network, they captured every detail. Wilson's teams desperately trying to purge digital records while preserving evidence they thought could save themselves. Blackwood's associates making frantic calls to political connections who suddenly wouldn't answer. Butcher's crew becoming more aggressive, their violence turning inward as their protection collapsed. "They're going to tear themselves apart," Torres observed. "That's exactly what I've been waiting for," Victoria explained. "Criminal empires like this don't fall to outside attacks. They collapse from within when pressure exposes their contradictions." Her laptop displayed incoming data streams from multiple sources. Federal agents tracking financial transactions as corporate allies tried to hide assets. DEA intercepting communications as drug networks scrambled to distance themselves. FBI documenting every attempt at obstruction, every offer of bribes, every threat of retaliation. "Victoria," Martinez said urgently. "Butcher's crew is preparing for something. They're distributing weapons, moving into attack positions." "I see it," Victoria replied calmly. "They're about to make their final mistake." Through their thermal imaging, they watched Butcher organizing his bikers for a violent breakout attempt. The Road Demons' sophisticated operation had devolved into exactly what they really were: thugs relying on brute force and terror. "All teams prepare to execute," Victoria commanded through their secure channel. "But hold positions until my signal." Her phone lit up with one final message from Blackwood. "You don't understand what you're doing. We're not just criminals, we're part of a system. You can't fight the whole system." Victoria's response was brief. "I'm not fighting the system. I'm exposing it." Through their feeds, they watched the Road Demons making their final preparations. Butcher's crew mounted their bikes, weapons ready. Wilson's teams grabbed what equipment they could carry. Blackwood's associates shredded their last documents. "They're going to make a run for it," Torres warned. "No," Victoria corrected, watching multiple pieces fall into place. "They're going to provide the final evidence we need." Inside the command center, the last pretense of legitimate business had vanished. Corporate executives stood shoulder to shoulder with street thugs. Professional security contractors coordinated with drug dealers. The entire criminal hierarchy was exposed, documented in high definition, from multiple angles. The war for Riverside Commons was about to reach its climax. The Road Demons had gathered their full strength, from street criminals to corporate conspirators, thinking they could overcome any opposition through force, money, and corruption. They were about to learn why Force Recon was more dangerous than any weapon they possessed, and Victoria Ramirez was ready to spring her final trap. The moment of truth arrived with the roar of motorcycle engines. Butcher's crew, weapons ready, formed a wedge formation at the park's main entrance. Behind them, Wilson's security teams established covering positions, while Blackwood's associates scrambled into armored SUVs. The Road Demons were preparing for a desperate breakout attempt. "All teams maintain positions," Victoria commanded through their secure channel. "Let them commit fully to their plan." Through their surveillance network, they watched the criminal enterprise reveal its true nature. The sophisticated security operation had devolved into raw violence, the corporate facade crumbling to expose the brutal reality beneath. "Victoria," Martinez reported urgently, "they're going to charge the perimeter. Butcher's crew is armed and desperate." "I know," Victoria replied calmly. "That's exactly what we need them to do." Her tactical display showed the full scope of what was unfolding. The Road Demons had abandoned any pretense of legitimate business. Armed criminals openly coordinated with corporate executives. Professional security contractors protected drug shipments. Every level of their organization was now clearly documented working together. "Federal teams report ready," Torres announced. "SWAT units in position. Tactical response teams standing by." "Hold positions," Victoria commanded. "Wait for my signal." Through their feeds, they watched Butcher organizing his final charge. 30 bikes lined up in attack formation, weapons visible, their riders abandoning any attempt to hide their true nature. Behind them, Wilson's teams established firing positions while Blackwood himself coordinated with corrupted officials via satellite phone. "They're going to hurt people," Martinez worried, watching the bikers rev their engines. "No," Victoria corrected. "They're going to expose themselves completely. Watch." Her phone lit up with desperate messages. "Wilson, We still have leverage. Think about the classified information we possess. Blackwood, this is your last chance. Walk away or face consequences. Butcher, get ready to die, Marine. Victoria's responses were precise, designed to push them further. To Wilson, classified information is worthless when everyone sees you're just another criminal. To Blackwood, consequences like RICO charges and asset seizure? To Butcher, still thinking like a street thug when you're about to face federal tactical teams. Through their surveillance, they watched her psychological warfare take effect. Wilson's team frantically transmitted data to offshore servers, unknowingly using channels Victoria's team had compromised. Blackwood's associates made final attempts to contact political protectors, who had already abandoned them. Butcher's crew, sensing their vulnerability, became more aggressive. "This is it," Torres warned as the bike's engines roared louder. "They're making their move." "Perfect," Victoria smiled grimly. "All teams prepare to execute Operation Thunderstrike on my mark." Through their thermal imaging, they watched the Road Demon's operation reach its breaking point. Butcher raised his arm, preparing to signal the charge. Wilson's teams took final firing positions. Blackwood's vehicles lined up for escape. "Now!" Victoria commanded. Suddenly, brilliant lights blazed from every direction, far more powerful than the Road Demon's own security lighting. Not just the surrounding buildings now, but dozens of concealed positions Victoria's team had prepared. The entire park was illuminated like daylight, capturing every detail in high definition. "What the?" Butcher's voice carried across their monitoring system, as his riders were momentarily blinded. "You still don't understand what you're facing," Victoria's voice replied, through their compromised communications. "This isn't about fighting you, it's about exposing you." Through their feeds, they watched confusion spread through enemy ranks. The bikers prepared for a violent breakout found themselves frozen in brilliant light. Wilson's teams, realizing their tactical advantage was gone, hesitated in their supporting positions. Blackwood's vehicles, meant to slip away in chaos, sat exposed like actors on a stage. "All federal units move in," Victoria commanded. "Local law enforcement maintain perimeter. Tactical teams secure objectives. Federal marshals targeted specific individuals identified through Victoria's intelligence gathering." "This is impossible," Wilson's voice crackled through their system. "We had countermeasures, security protocols. You had technology," Victoria corrected. "I had intelligence. Everything you built, every system you installed, every protocol you followed, it all served my purpose." Through their surveillance network, they captured every moment of the operation. Butcher's crew, realizing they were surrounded, divided between those trying to fight and those attempting to surrender. Wilson's professional contractors, seeing the federal response, quickly dropped their weapons. Blackwood's associates, understanding their protection had evaporated, began demanding lawyers. The war for Riverside Commons had reached its decisive moment. The Road Demons had gathered their full strength, from street thugs to corporate criminals, thinking they could overcome any opposition through force and corruption. Instead, they had walked into a trap designed by someone who understood that the greatest weapon in modern warfare wasn't firepower, it was information. And Victoria Ramirez had just demonstrated why Force Recon was more devastating than any army. Sunrise painted Riverside Commons in shades of gold as federal teams methodically secured the area. The Road Demon's sophisticated fortress had become a massive crime scene, with evidence response units documenting every detail of their operation. "Final count," Torres reported, checking his tablet. 47 arrests, including Butcher's entire crew, Wilson's security team, and Blackwood's corporate allies. 22 corrupted officials identified, over 40 million in assets seized. Victoria watched through their surveillance network as the full scope of their victory unfolded. DEA teams cataloged drug shipments hidden in the park's maintenance buildings. FBI cyber units secured Wilson's sophisticated equipment, already extracting data about international criminal connections. Federal marshals led away judges and police officials who had arrived thinking they could protect their criminal allies. "They're still trying to make deals," Martinez noted, monitoring police frequencies. "Everyone's offering evidence against everyone else. Be Because they finally understand their situation, Victoria explained. Criminal empires maintain power through shared interests. Once that breaks, it's every person for themselves. Her tactical display showed multiple operations continuing across the city. FBI teams raiding shell companies identified through Wilson's encrypted data. DEA agents seizing properties linked to Blackwood's money laundering. Federal prosecutors preparing indictments against officials exposed by their own attempts at intervention. Victoria, Torres said quietly, some of these people, they're powerful. They have resources, connections we don't even know about. No, Victoria corrected, pulling up new data on her laptop. They had resources, they had connections, but everything they built was based on shadows and fear. Watch what happens when you bring things into the light. Through their feeds, they watched the Road Demons' entire organization crumbling. Street soldiers quickly turned on their leaders, offering detailed testimony about criminal operations. Professional contractors, seeing no profit in loyalty, provided technical data about their security systems. Corporate allies facing RICO charges raced to make deals. This is bigger than we imagined, Martinez reported, reviewing incoming evidence. International drug routes, weapons smuggling, human trafficking. They weren't just controlling a park, they were using it as a hub for global criminal operations. I know, Victoria replied calmly. That's exactly why I let them fortify their position here. Every security measure they installed, every system they implemented, every operation they coordinated, it all provided evidence of their larger enterprise. Her phone lit up with messages from multiple agencies. FBI celebrating the largest organized crime bust in state history. DEA mapping international trafficking networks exposed by the operation. Federal prosecutors building cases that would dismantle criminal enterprises across 3 continents. But the park, Wilson's voice crackled through their monitoring system one last time. All that sophisticated equipment, the surveillance systems, the security protocols, were exactly what we needed, Victoria cut him off. You thought you were building a fortress. Instead, you created a perfect case study in organized crime. Every camera you installed recorded evidence. Every communication you encrypted provided proof. Every security measure you implemented demonstrated your criminal enterprise. Through their surveillance, they watched the final pieces of the operation falling into place. Evidence response teams documenting. Connections between street crime and corporate corruption. Federal agents tracking financial trails that would lead to more arrests. Local police freed from corrupted leadership, reclaiming their role as community protectors. Victoria, Martinez said with amazement, this isn't just taking down criminals. This is dismantling an entire system of corruption. Because that's what Force Recon is really about, Victoria explained. You don't just fight the enemy in front of you. You identify their support structure, their resource networks, their command and control, then you take it all down at once. Her tactical display showed the operation's ripple effects spreading across the city. Corrupt officials resigning rather than face investigation. Criminal enterprises scrambling to distance themselves from the road demons. International organizations abandoning operations rather than risk exposure. As evening approached, Victoria completed her usual run through Riverside Commons. But this time the park was different. Where the road demons had installed security checkpoints, children played freely. Where Wilson's teams had mounted surveillance cameras, families gathered for picnics. Where Blackwood's associates had conducted illegal business, local musicians performed for appreciative crowds. David Chen approached, tears of joy in his eyes. The park feels alive again, Victoria. For the first time in months, people aren't afraid. Victoria smiled, watching the community reclaim their space. The road demons had built their criminal empire on fear and corruption, thinking they were untouchable. Instead, they had fallen to something more powerful than any weapon, a community united against injustice, guided by someone who understood that true victory wasn't just about defeating enemies. It was about protecting what mattered most. And Major Victoria Vic Ramirez had done exactly that. 1 week after the fall of the road demons, Riverside Commons hummed with a different kind of activity. Federal teams had cleared away the last of the gang's surveillance equipment, replacing harsh security lights with warm park lighting. Where armed thugs once patrolled, Final briefing from the FBI task force, Torres reported, joining Victoria on her evening run. The numbers are staggering. 83 total arrests across 4 states, over $120 million in assets seized, 31 corrupt officials facing federal charges. And that's just the beginning. Victoria slowed her pace, observing the park's transformation. Community members had worked tirelessly to erase every trace of the road demon's occupation. Gardens replaced checkpoints, picnic areas covered former surveillance posts, and laughter echoed where threats once ruled. Wilson broke first, Martinez added, falling into step beside them. Offered everything he knew about international operations in exchange for consideration. The intelligence he's providing is dismantling criminal networks across 5 continents. And Blackwood? Victoria asked, though she already knew the answer. Facing RICO charges, money laundering, conspiracy, Torres confirmed. His lawyers are frantically trying to make deals, but federal prosecutors have too much evidence. His entire corporate empire is being dismantled piece by piece. Through her remaining surveillance feeds, Victoria watched the ripple effects of their operation continuing to spread. Criminal enterprises that once thought themselves untouchable were crumbling. Corrupt officials who had provided protection were facing justice. The illusion of invincibility that had protected the road demons had been shattered completely. Butcher and his crew? She inquired, pausing to watch a group of teenagers reclaim their basketball court. Most are cooperating, Martinez confirmed. Once they realized their protection was gone, they turned on each other. The evidence they're providing goes back years. Every threat, every act of violence, every connection to larger criminal operations. Victoria's phone buzzed with updates from multiple agencies. DEA mapping drug routes exposed by Wilson's data. FBI tracking financial connections revealed through Blackwood's records. International law enforcement coordinating operations based on their intelligence. But it's the community that really won, Torres observed, watching families return to their park. Look at this place now. Music classes by the amphitheater, art shows on weekends, kids everywhere. It's more than just taking down criminals, it's like the whole neighborhood came back to life. David Chen approached them, leading his morning Tai Chi class. The bruises that had once marked his arms were gone, replaced by a peaceful confidence. We're starting a community watch program, he announced proudly. Not just for security, for organizing events, supporting local artists, bringing people together. The park isn't just safer now, it's stronger. Victoria nodded, understanding that this was the true measure of their success. The road demons had tried to control through fear, but they never understood that real power came from community. Every person they had threatened, every family they had terrorized, every business they had extorted, all had become part of something stronger than any criminal enterprise. There's talk of making this a model for other communities, Martinez said. The FBI is already developing training programs based on your operation. Not just the tactical aspects, but the whole approach. How to build community resilience. How to turn victims into active participants in their own protection. Because that's what they never understood, Victoria replied, watching children play freely where armed guards once stood. You can't control a community through fear forever. Eventually, people find their courage. They just need to know they're not fighting alone. Her phone buzzed one final time, a message from FBI headquarters. The Road Demons case was being used to launch a nationwide initiative against organized crime, focusing not just on enforcement, but on strengthening communities against criminal infiltration. As the sun set over Riverside Commons, Victoria completed her run. But this time she wasn't watching for threats or analyzing patterns. Instead, she saw what the road demons never could. The real strength of a community wasn't in its defenses, but in its connections. Every parent watching their children play without fear. Every artist sharing their work freely. Every elderly couple enjoying an evening walk. This was what victory really looked like. The war for Riverside Commons had ended, but its legacy was just beginning. In trying to control one park through force and fear, the road demons had instead created a blueprint for defeating criminal enterprises everywhere. They had taught law enforcement an invaluable lesson, that the most powerful weapon against organized crime wasn't firepower or technology, but the that Vic Ramirez had shown them all how to fight that war and win. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.